just what has changed in Dynasty in the AFC West. We're going to talk about that in today's video. Brian, Dynasty football is a whole another animal. I saw people like selling Justin Fields for like just one first round pick 2 weeks ago, and I'm sure they're regretting that now. So, it's tempting to overreact week by week, but I think it's good to kind of let 4 or 5 weeks play out in the season and then kind of see what's changed from there. So I don't know. How do you approach that? Do you try not to overreact as much as you can after week one, or week to week, or try to look things more like month to month or something, or year to year even?
Yeah, that's honestly that is probably a decent approach to it, is looking at it about a month to month kind of a thing. I know in our Dynasty league, like running like calculators and stuff, and before the season, it was very much like oh, like my team is heavily favored, and there's other teams that are like not good, and it's funny how like that totally got flipped on its head, especially through the first 3 weeks. So I don't know. I think you kind of have to have a little conviction for sure. You can't necessarily be super wishy-washy, but it is kind of crazy to think about like how much Dynasty values do change on a week-to-week basis in people's eyes, and
yeah.
I think playing Dynasty is you're almost playing the stock market kind of a thing when it comes to these guys. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Just like, yeah. So I don't know. I try not to overreact too much, but you definitely got to be honest with yourself, like when it comes to how good you think your team is, like if you're a contender and all that stuff, like I think it's a little early to try and figure that out, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I think Dynasty is becoming more and more popular. So I think it is becoming more like redraft, just because you're getting a lot of people who never played Dynasty before, and that's how they treat it, right? They treat it very much like a redraft league. Like, what can you do for me this year? And part of that you kind of have to with certain players. But yeah, it is interesting balancing like the stock market aspect of it. We're going to talk about a couple players throughout these videos where it's just like these players are probably at the highest value they're ever going to have. And the smart move is to maybe get off of them, right? At their high, like you sell your stocks at the highest you think it's going to be before it dips, right? So,
yeah,
but it's hard to balance that, like, versus still trying to win at the same time. It's really hard. But what we're doing in today's video is just kind of, we're going to go through division by division. Obviously, today's just the AFC West, and just kind of talk about like, what's changed. It's Friday, October 6th, so we're just heading into week 5. By the time this releases, week 5 might be over, so keep that in mind. Like if a major injury happens to one of these guys, that kind of changes everything. But yeah, we're just going to kind of jump right into it. Start, of course, with the best team in the AFC West, the Chargers, of course. No bias there. And yeah, I think there's kind of 2 big questions here in the receiving weapons here. One of them is Mike Williams. Obviously has a ACL tear, out for the year this year. And he's getting up there in age. I was always surprised. Like, he's a 30-year-old receiver. Soon, yeah, he just turned 29, so he'll be 30 basically at the beginning of next year. Very early on next year, which is old for a receiver. Has a major injury, might not even be back with the Chargers. There's that chance too, and I feel like at least half his value was kind of tied to like, oh, he's on the Chargers with Justin Herbert, right? So I don't know. What do you think about Mike Williams? Like, if you, are you just kind of trying to get anything for him now in a trade, or are you just going to hold on and you don't want to sell him? Like, if someone offers you like a 3rd round pick, are you just going to send it and just take that 3rd round pick for Mike Williams, or what are you doing?
I don't know. Like, he is kind of a tough one. I think it kind of depends on like where your team is at, like the nice thing is like, he's definitely not going to play for the rest of the year. And so you don't necessarily have to make a move right now. like I think he's a decent target, like for a rebuilding team in general. Like I don't know how many of those. So one thing I wanted to say about dynasty leagues in general, like it really does take a few years for them to really feel like a dynasty league. Like we're only in our second year of our first dynasty league, and like it's still very much like everyone kind of feels like they have a chance still, because like no one is completely terrible. Like things might have broken wrong last year for them, and injuries and whatnot, but it's like, oh, like that's kind of how I felt like my team went. Like I didn't have guys show up the way that I thought they were, or it was just kind of like, yeah, I'm not ready to like completely tear this down. So yeah, when it comes to Mike Williams, I think, yeah, third round pick for him, like I think that's fine. Like if he's on your, if you're a rebuilding team in a league that's been around for a little while, like you probably already should have sold him before the season, or within the first few weeks. So hopefully you didn't get stuck with him. But I don't think it's the worst thing to have Mike Williams, especially if you have IR spots, or just most dynasty leagues have giant rosters. So I feel like he can just hang out there on the end of the bench. It'll be interesting to see. I know Quentin Johnston was kind of like he was drafted. He has a similar like play style as Mike Williams, from what I understand. So it's kind of like, oh, he's the Mike Williams replacement. But I don't know. Like he has a decent dead cap next year. I think it's like 13 million.
Yeah.
If they just cut him. So it's like he might restructure, stay on the Chargers, and I don't know. It might be the best thing for him and the team, honestly. So I think he's a solid hold right now, especially if you're rebuilding. And I feel like if you're contending, maybe you can trade him for some sort of like some piece that might end up helping you in the bye weeks. But
yeah,
I don't think trading him for a pick is necessarily the right thing to do, because if you had Mike Williams, ideally, like you think you're a contending team, or you were, or whatever. And so like, why do you need a third round pick necessarily? I mean, trade capital is always good because you don't necessarily have to hold on to it and actually draft with it. It can become a piece to use to trade later. So I can see that aspect of it too. But I think a third is probably right around where he is. Maybe a third, and squeeze the juice a little bit and try and get a fourth also, which is, it's pretty easy to convince people to give you a fourth because they're not very valuable in general. So
yeah, the issue with Mike Williams is, well, I mean, if you have him and you're selling him at his lowest that he's ever been, essentially. And the lowest maybe he'll ever be. Like, I think maybe the smart move is to hold on to him if you have him and just wait until the offseason rolls around and the hype starts building, like, oh, he's on track, he's ahead of schedule, blah, blah, blah. He's going to be back. He's back with the Chargers, and then try and sell him. Like, I think there's going to be more value there because, I mean, if you can get like a second round pick for him, I'm sending him away. Whether I'm contending, not contending, whatever. If I can get a second round pick for Mike Williams, like he's gone. Yeah, it just shows you like how fragile it is. Like just looking at keep trade cut, he's fallen 16 spots. I guess he was the wide receiver at 42 before, and now he's the wide receiver at 58. So he's fallen a lot, definitely, and it just shows you again, like how fragile everything is in Dynasty. So
that's kind of interesting that he was 42 to start the season.
I think so. If I'm reading Keep Trade Cut right, it says down 16 spots. I don't know if that's positional or overall, but I think it's positional. It looks like it.
Sure, it is.
Looks like it was 42. Yeah, he was wide receiver
Yeah,
42 basically
yeah,
to start the year. So,
that's crazy to me to think about that. Like I know everyone. I feel like a lot of people are ageist when it comes to Dynasty in general, but it's like, dude, these old guys that are still around are valuable, and I
mhm,
guess maybe we'll get into that a little bit more, like once we get closer to the actual draft again. But it's like
mhm.
it's kind of wild to me. Like I'm actually looking at it right now. It's like Cooper Cup is wide receiver 21. Obviously, that's completely different if you're a contending team kind of a thing, you know.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, for sure. So yeah, again, if I can get a second for him, he's gone. If I can buy him for maybe like a late third, maybe I will, and just try and flip him next year when the hype train comes. Like that's not a bad option either. So, but you mentioned it with Quinton Johnston, another interesting situation here, and it just showing how people overreact. Potentially, he's dropped 16 spots, and it's like I understand we want like we haven't seen anything from him, but also like he's a rookie receiver that was drafted in the first round to the Chargers. Like just because he hasn't done anything the first 4 weeks, should he really be dropping 16 spots from wide receiver down to wide receiver 42? Yeah, like from 26 to 42. Like to me, that kind of signals like, can you buy low on Quinton Johnston? Like I would definitely try and buy low on him and just take the gamble. Like he was still that first round rookie draft pick, like what, sixth, seventh overall, eighth in rookie draft. So
yeah,
um, I don't know if you're feeling the same or if you feel a little discouraged, like we haven't seen anything yet from him. What do you think?
honestly, I wasn't a huge Quentin Johnson fan going into the season. Like he was definitely my least favorite of the first round rookie guys, but I don't think he definitely shouldn't be dropping that far 4 games into his career. Like it's like, come on, dude. Like if you could acquire Quentin Johnson for a second round pick, like yeah, get him. Especially with the injury to Mike Williams in front of him, like he, a month from now, I got to imagine he's worth more than a second. Like I mean, you just paid a first round pick, like a later ish first round pick for him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely think like yeah, buy low. If you have him on your team, hold him. Or try and like honestly, in one of my leagues, I think I kind of mentioned it before on like maybe other videos, but if you want to learn like how to trade in Dynasty in general, go adopt an orphan league. And like basically that's a league where like one of the managers dropped out, and usually you can get in the first year or even 2 years sometimes for like relatively cheap, because usually people drop out from managing a team because the team's pretty terrible. But
Mhm.
yeah, like we did that in the off season, and I've actually had a lot of fun tearing that team down, getting a lot of draft capital and young players and stuff like that. And like I'm actually in my orphan league, I'm looking to try and package Quentin Johnston and maybe something else to like go after, JSN or something like that, because he's another guy. We'll get to him eventually, but like he's dropped quite a bit. It doesn't make sense to me 4 weeks in that these rookie receivers are moving that much around. Like
Mhm.
it's like, why did you draft them if you were only going to like watch them for like a couple of weeks and then be like, oh no, this isn't what I need. Like definitely
Yeah.
buy low if you can.
Yeah, I agree. I'd try and buy low on Quinton. I mean, I'm not sending a first round pick for him,
No,
unless I know for sure it's going to be like super late. But even then, I'd probably use it to just build my team to win. But yeah, it's definitely a buy low in my opinion. So, but yeah, with the Chargers, I don't think much else has changed. Like Justin Herbert, I guess maybe you got a little bit of reassurance if you're a little worried about his finish last year. He's I think like QB2 on the year or something like that. So you're fine with Justin Herbert. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know Keenan Allen. You're kind of year to year with Keenan Allen. Like that's kind of where you're at. Like any season now, he could drop off. He's actually QB1 and I think 4 point per passing touchdown. But yeah, Keenan Allen. It's kind of like any year it could drop out, but this year, if you're rebuilding, sell him. But obviously, like you have a stud on your team if you're not, so you're just kind of keeping him and maybe riding it out.
Yeah, and go buy Eckler if you're a contender, especially if it's on a team that's like worried about his injury and all that stuff. I mean, they're on a bye week too. I mean, I guess the time to buy him would have been even 2 weeks ago when it was like, oh, we don't know if he's gonna play. Like definitely Eckler's the man. Keenan Allen's the man. Like get those old players, like you can probably get them less than what they're actually worth. Like at a certain point you kind of have to play, if you're a serious contender, you have to play Dynasty like redraft in terms of like go get those players and win it. Just I don't know what you're waiting for. It's like, oh, I don't want to give up my draft capital. It's like I'd much rather have Keenan Allen or Austin Eckler on my team than a first round pick next year, kind of a thing. Like if you can get those guys for a single first, I think that's a smash play right there. Even if you're not contending, honestly, maybe you don't want to trade your first round pick if you're like that terrible, but if you can work out a deal and like get him on your team, like either one of those guys, and then flip him to another team who's actually contending for more, like wait a few weeks and then it's risky obviously because there's always the possibility of injury and then the floor falls out, but you're playing the stock market here, so I mean go get these guys, especially if they're being undervalued in your league.
And also like I'm always never afraid to trade guys, like even if I am contending to a certain extent, like if I know I can get like Eckler and I can get a first round pick and I think this first round pick could be like a top 5 pick, you almost kind of like, I personally feel like I kind of have to make the move because it's just like, what's the best move overall? Like, what can I turn that first round pick into?
Right.
It's just going to hold so much more value. So trying to balance that.
And right now, players are worth more than they were even just a month ago. Like, and draft picks are kind of like, they're still holding their value to a certain extent, but just you wait and see, like over the next month, like this is when trades are really going to start happening and involving draft capital. And draft capital basically almost never goes down in value. Like people, especially like right before the draft, that's like when it's kind of at its top, where it's like, oh, like what's in I want the mystery box kind of a thing, where it's like, you can definitely use that to your advantage for sure.
Yeah. But moving on to the next team, the Chiefs. I guess the two biggest questions here are Sky Moore. I mean, he probably went maybe first round in a lot of rookie drafts, definitely early second round, just because of mostly because he went to the Chiefs. He was also a high draft pick. Will he ever produce to expectations? Like he's dropped 21 spots over the last month. He had no better situation than the first couple weeks of the season when it was kind of him and no one else really, like MVS was there, but Kelsey was out. Tony wasn't really playing, and he didn't produce. So are we just kind of, again, is he another one where if I can get anything for him, a third round pick, just kind of trading him off? I personally don't think he's going to live up to the expectations that maybe we all had. They just don't use him. I kind of watched a couple of the games and he's literally running 3-yard routes and turning around. I don't know. It's just, I don't think it's ever going to happen for him. I don't know how you're feeling about Sky Moore. Personally.
Yeah. The ship might have sailed for him. If you can get him for a late pick, or as a part of a throw-in deal, he is on the Chiefs and everything like that, but he definitely he's not gonna justify the cost on what you spent on him. And you know, that's okay. You know, like not every first round guy can be a hit, you know, first round in terms of like where you
Rookie
drafted him in a
draft.
rookie
Yeah.
draft. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm totally fine moving on from him. But at the same time, it's like, what are you gonna get for him? Are you trading him for a third round pick? Like, probably not. Like, you might as well just
I
hold
might.
him. Like, what's that?
I think I might. I mean, just
Okay.
like I understand the fact of like, or like, it's more about what I believe in him. Like, I understand, like, it's kind of like, well, I might as well just hold on and see what I can get. But also, like, you know, third round picks, yeah, like you said, their trade capital. Like, you can use them to push a trade over and stuff like that. So it's just one of
Yeah.
those things where like just kind of getting out when I can, you know, like get something for it. Um,
One thing that I've like tried to do a few times, and successfully in some instances, like he might be one of those guys, like you can package Sky Moore and your third round pick and try and get a second, you know, like
yeah,
you can use him as like an upgrade chip, you know, where people think like, oh, like they might think the same thing, where like if you're valuing him as like a third round pick, it's like you're basically giving 2/3 to get a second, and it's like I'd make that trade all day long. So
hmm
I think that's one thing that people never really think about, because they're like, oh, I need draft capital. I need draft capital. It's like, well, you can always upgrade your current draft capital, like with a player that's not necessarily worth much on his own. Like you're not going to get a second round pick for Sky Moore in most instances. Like,
hmm
so, but if you can basically turn him into a second round pick by packaging your third with it, like you should do it.
yeah, for sure. It's a good lesson also of like um what like Sky Moore on September 8th, so it's like right before the season starting, or maybe the first game's played, is wide receiver 40, and by September 14th, he's wide receiver 60. So it's a really good, literally like 8 days later, like it's a really good example of like you maybe could have sold a little bit high on Sky Moore, like and been like, oh, he's the Chiefs' number one receiver. I know it's a risk, it's always a risk, but you know, it's just think about stuff like that as like, is this player's like that could have been within the last 3 months, that could have been Sky Moore's the highest he's ever going to be rated again, ever. Right. Like I always think about like Chase Claypool after his like 3 touchdown game in 2020. He was literally, that was the highest point he's ever been. And now he's been on 3 teams in 3 years. Right. Like, so it's just interesting to look at those things. And of course, you're taking the risk, right? Like, what if Sky Moore hit and then you sold him for, you know, you undersold him. So it's just
Yeah,
balancing the process.
it kind of comes down to like, if you can extract some value from a guy that you're not feeling that strong about anyways, like right off the bat, like like um I'm sure we'll talk about like Puka
Yeah.
when we get to that division, but he's like one of those guys. It's like, think about like you know, he was undrafted, or you know, he was like a fourth round guy in rookie drafts, and it's like after week one, it's like, oh, if you want to turn around and sell him right away for a second round pick, there was a lot of those, you know. And then it's like, well, what if you did that? Do you start having seller's remorse at this
Yeah.
point? Because it's like, oh, I could have got more from him. But at a certain, I don't think there's necessarily a wrong answer there, where it's like you turned a fourth round guy or an undrafted guy that you picked up off waiver into a second round pick in week one, versus, oh, I could have held him and he could have been worth more. It's like you just kind of have to determine like when do you want to get out. Like, you don't want to get too greedy necessarily, and like say like, oh, I need more for this guy, like he's going to be worth more. And if you believe in the player, then hold on to him, you know. Like,
I mean,
if you watch him play and he's looking like a guy that's actually like, you know, it's not like an illusion, then it's like, yeah, like make your own decision. You have to have some conviction.
yeah. Yeah. I'll expand a little bit more on Puka when we get to that because I do have
Yep.
some interesting thoughts on that as well. But the other big thing on this team, I think, with the Chiefs is Pacheco. Like he's definitely on the rise. The way they're using him uh, is awesome to see. He's a very important part of that offense. I was, he's moved up 9 spots in the last month. He's kind of that weird player that you always get those players that are not worth a second, whether it's early, mid, or late, but also not worth a first. So maybe like 2 seconds or something, or a second and a third. He's running back 18. Do you think he can get even higher than that, or is this another case of like if someone's going to overpay for even if you're a contending team and someone says I'll give you a first for Pacheco, you kind of have to take that, right? Like
I
I
would,
know,
yeah.
yeah, I know you can use them and stuff, but it's just like you have to take for a running back that was he undrafted or seventh round pick, 5th round, I forget. But yeah, it's just he's kind of at his peak in my opinion. I don't know how much higher he can actually go. So
Yeah,
yeah, you
I
said you would trade
definitely
him.
agree. Yeah, I would definitely trade him for a first if I could. Because the way I'm looking at him is if I can get a first round pick for him and then I can turn that pick around and add a second to it and get a guy like Austin Eckler or something like that. It's like, oh, you just basically got Eckler for a second. Like you upgraded from Pacheco to Eckler for a second round pick kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would do that like in a heartbeat for sure. Cause like, again, that it's gonna be the trend. It's like just because you get this draft capital doesn't mean you have to use it in the draft. Like it's trade chips also.
Yeah,
Trade chips. That's what I said, not
so
trips. I don't know. It sounded weird to me too.
it's a hard one to say. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Like I don't know, it is nice to see, but at the same time, like we have to be realistic. Like with running backs, there's very few that I really look past now. I look past the year that's coming. Like, what can you do for me this year? And yeah, Pacheco's probably going to be a top 15 running back this year. But beyond that, I don't know. Like, I can't tell you. What if they draft someone? What if they sign or trade for Jonathan Taylor or something crazy? Like, and then Pacheco's nothing. Like,
Yeah. You
like
gotta remember like he was drafted in the 7th round also. Like
yeah,
I'm actually looking on Keep Trade Cut. 7th round pick 30. So just a few picks before Brock Purdy. Well, I guess there's more than 32 picks in the later rounds anyways, but because of compensatory picks and everything. But
hmm
it's like the thing you have to kind of keep in mind with those guys is because the team's not super heavily invested in those guys, like capital wise, like they can move on from them pretty easy. Like especially running backs, like they can use them up in a year or 2 years or whatever and just move on from them, and it doesn't really affect them like
yeah,
very much, so that's something to think about. Like Pacheco is one of those guys, like you probably got him in like the 3rd or 4th round in your rookie draft last year,
yeah,
based on like his landing spot. And then now if you can turn him into, if that asset has matured into like a first or a couple of seconds or something like that, like, yeah, you should definitely consider it,
yeah,
unless you're a Pacheco guy, you know.
yeah, yeah, for sure. But yeah, with the Chiefs, I mean, there's not much else. Like, Mahomes, we don't need to talk about Kelsey. It's kind of a year to year situation. Rasheed Rice probably hasn't lost any value whatsoever. Like, so yeah, we don't really have to talk too much more about guys on the Chiefs unless you want to talk about Kadarius Toney or something.
I don't.
Okay, so we'll move on to the Broncos. A couple questions here is Javonte Williams. Man, like how high was he? I'm gonna go back and check right now, like how high he got before his injury last year. I'm sure it was pretty damn high.
I bet you it
Um,
was, I'm gonna guess running back 3, like overall or something like that. Like he was, yeah, I gotta assume he was top 5. Like I'm gonna say top
yeah,
3. Like he
I'm
was,
seeing two at one point, three,
yeah,
four, two, three, four. Basically,
the hype.
all off season from December of 2021 up until basically he got hurt. He was like the top 3-4 RB or running back. So,
Yeah.
And then he gets hurt, and now we're looking at the RB 21, 20. So do you think, like, what are you trying to do with Javonte if you have him, or is he a guy maybe you're kind of targeting as like a rebuilding team? Like, all right, I'll sell an Austin Eckler for a first round pick and Javonte. Like, is that a move you're okay with, and being like, okay, like we'll see what Javonte turns into a year out from his injury type of thing, like, and I get the first round pick. Is that something like you're trying to do, or I don't know, like how do we approach Javonte Williams at this point?
Yeah,
different coaching staff too, by the way, like that's always a
yeah,
little scary.
yeah. I was gonna kind of bring that up. Like, I still haven't like really studied that too much. I've heard it a lot that like, and it seems to be the case, where it's like, oh, like, like new head coach and stuff like that. Like they like to bring in their own guys so they can feel like, hey, look what I did, kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. So that's a little worrisome, I guess. But honestly, yeah, I mean, if I could turn Eckler in as a rebuilding team with Eckler, if I could turn him into Javonte Williams and a first, like I'm probably doing that. I don't see why not, because I think you could probably just turn around and get a first for Javonte anyways, like I think that's a kind of a fair price for him ish, like probably closer to 2 seconds. I don't know. Like it just kind of depends on the manager that you're trading to, but like there's definitely value in him and like the expectation and everything. And I'm not expecting a whole lot this year, unfortunately. Like it was kind of looking like that. Like we might actually get to see him healthy at some point this year, which we still might, you never know. But it's one of those things where it's like, man, maybe he came back a little bit too early and they've got him kind of on a pitch count. And it's just kind of like the Broncos still aren't looking, well, they're looking like the Broncos. So, I mean, I guess we kind of should have expected that one, but it's just kind of like, he's a tough one for sure, but I mean, he's involved in the passing game. Like he is the obvious most talented player on the roster at the position. So I think there's a lot to like there, but there is a lot of warning signs too, to like maybe you get out from him.
Yeah, I agree with that.
If you could get a first round pick for Javonte Williams, it's funny because I'm like kind of on both sides of it. Like I would probably, it's all down to individual teams, but I think that's kind of like a late first is kind of like the fair value for him.
Yeah. I would take a random first for Javonte in a heartbeat. I'd do it for a lot of running backs, like just paying more attention to like the running backs and how quickly they fall. Like it's just crazy. Like going from,
very volatile.
It is. So I'd take if I could get a second and I knew it was like the earliest, like the worst team in the league type of thing, I might even take that. Like just, maybe a little something on top, but it's like, it's just really tough to know what, like he's not young anymore. Like we're in his third season now, and his third season's looking like to be a wash too. Like it's going to be nothing in terms of production. Like it's up now.
Yeah,
so
if he finishes as a top 24 running back this season, that's probably like as good as he's going to be this year. Like, I don't even think he's going to get there, honestly, the way it's kind of like starting off, but the season is young. So we'll have to wait and 100%. See.
Kind of on the same lines. I mean, Jerry Jeudy is another guy to talk about on this team. Like, man, like, is he ever going to live up to what he was considered potentially the best receiver in that draft class. There was debate there, but he was definitely in the conversation. And, we just haven't seen it with him. Like, I think last year he was okay, but, he's fallen to wide receiver 37. Like, what do you, if you have Jeudy, are you just trying to get out again? Someone offers you a random second round pick. What are you doing? Are you taking that? Or are you just saying, you know what? I think I can get more, or I'm better off holding. Like he was as high as wide receiver 12, at one point.
Yeah, he's tough. I don't think I would just get rid of him for a second, but I don't know what else you can really get for him. Yeah, I don't know. He had a lot of hype even going into the season again, like I am not a Jerry Judy guy necessarily. Because, FTB, fuck them Broncos. Like I don't know, man. I think that he holds a little bit more name value than just like a random second. If you're sure it's going to be like an early second, which I don't think you can be sure of like at this point, unless like that team's just a disaster. It's like, yeah, like I would do that, but I would hold on. Hopefully he has like a couple of good games this season at some point and be like, oh, hey, look, Jerry Judy's here. Give me 2 seconds or something. Like, but I think I'm just holding right now. Like he might just expire. He might rot on the vine on your team. And I'm kind of okay with that. If I drafted him and I still have them or still have him in my 4th year at this point, it's like, you must really believe in him, or you have like sunken cost fallacy going on there.
Yeah. Would you trade him for any, like the furthest out first round pick, the 2026 first round pick? Would you just take that for Jerry Judy?
I would definitely.
2 seconds.
Yeah, 2 seconds easy.
Okay. Yeah, it sucks. It sucks to see, like someone so highly regarded.
Yeah. Could be wrong. I mean, he is only 24 and a half years old, just kind of surprising in his 4th year.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess Russell Wilson on this team, like you've seen, okay, like he can still hold value in terms of, still be probably a relevant fantasy quarterback, at least for the next couple years, including this one. So that's good to see. I mean, Cortland Sutton, like he is what he is type of thing. Like if you want to buy him for like a late second, that's probably the most I'd spend for like Cortland Sutton if he continues what he's doing this year.
It's funny because I actually do have him on my Dynasty orphan team, and someone tried to get him from me pretty cheap in the preseason. I was like, you know what? I'm going to hold on to him. I think he's going to be worth the 2nd round pick in the season. And then after the first week, that same team like kind of was like, oh, good luck with that kind of a thing, because the Broncos look terrible. But I think honestly, like easy, like a 2nd round pick is completely fair value for him right now. Like I think you can have him as a depth piece on a contending team, and I don't mind that at all.
Yeah, I agree. But yeah, onto the Raiders, our last team here, last for a reason.
God damn it.
Josh Jacobs. I think thinking back on Josh Jacobs, this was the perfect example. And he could have a really good year this year. I'm not saying that, but the perfect example to me of the player having by far his best season 4 years into his career. And that would have been like, now I need to sell him. Like, all right, I got RB2 or 03 overall out of him. Now I'm going to sell him. I know it sounds a little like crazy because he wasn't even necessarily old, but it's like that was his 4th year in the league, and that was by far the best we've seen him. And I think he should have been traded probably by most people. I think that was the right process play, whether you were contending or not, like realizing like this is probably not going to happen again. This was the peak value of him. No, he's still RB12. You can still get good value for him, but I think you could have potentially gotten a little more, if you sold him after last year. So I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I think with running backs specifically, like you kind of like it's not as much their age as it is the contract. I think like I think when guys start coming up against their contracts, like to try and get their second one, like we've seen like what that looks like, especially in this off season. It's like that's a really good time to sell them. Or to sell running backs in general is before they get that second contract. If they get that second contract, I mean, look what the Raiders told us, like through their actions last year. Like they didn't even pick up his 5th year option. You know, like they were kind of like, whatever. And then they franchise tagged him this year. Wait, or did they tag him last year? I can't. Maybe I'm misremembering this a little bit, but
it was
I
a
remember
franchise last year, I think, or I forget. No, last year was just his last year.
Yeah,
of his
just
rookie
just
contract.
part of the last year of his rookie contract. Yeah, because they have to. If they're going to pick up the 5th-year option, they have to do it before the 4th year starts. So there's kind of that sweet period between after the 3rd year, but before the 4th year starts is when they actually have to tag them. And then all the money becomes fully guaranteed and all that good stuff. You know, they have to pay him a certain amount. And obviously, it's not the worst position to be in, like what he was in for last year, because it's like, oh, the Raiders are just going to use the hell out of him and then throw him away. But then he was awesome last year, so they're kind of like they're almost eating crow to a certain extent, because now they're like, oh, now we have to tag him to keep him around for another year. But yeah, he's a tough one. I say hold him for now if you have him, because he has had 3 really bad games and then a good game last week. He's going to have more good games this year, and then get him off your roster unless you're a serious contender.
Yeah. And if you're a serious contender and you can still kind of buy him low, I would. You know, if you can get
definitely
second round pick, throw a second round pick and get him, like I would 100% do that.
I doubt you'll be able to get him for a second, but maybe a couple of seconds. You know, maybe a second and a young player.
Yeah, like a throw-in piece or something. But yeah, and then Devontae Adams, I guess, is another. You know, there's not really much going on this team. So Devontae Adams, like, what would you, if you're a contending team, like, what would you buy him for? Are you fine sending a first round pick right now, October 6th for Devontae Adams?
Oh yeah. To circle back to Quentin Johnston, I'd send Quentin Johnston and a first round pick to get Devontae Adams on my team. Like, I think he's worth the equivalent of a couple of firsts, like however that works out in your head, you know, like especially if they're like later assets, I guess. Like, you know, like if you can send Dalton Kincaid and your first this year, like I'm just trying to think of guys that kind of went towards the end of the first round, you know. If you can do that, like, get Devontae Adams like on your team. Like, the dude is awesome, and like he's quarterback proof, he's matchup proof, like he's the man. He's one of the best wide receivers playing the game, so get him.
Yeah, I didn't understand, like, in terms of redraft, like what people were like, oh, I don't know if you should go in the late second round. It's like, what are we doing?
Oh, Jimmy Garoppolo. It's like, we did that last year with Derek Carr, and look, he was awesome.
Jared Stidham, and
he's learn your lessons. You know, targets are earned. Like, the dude gets a shitload of targets because he's awesome. You know, it's not because. And like, honestly, before the season started, we thought he was like kind of the only guy on the team, and obviously we've seen the emergence of Jacoby Myers. I know I keep saying that, and I know it kind of probably bothers you a little bit because you do keep saying, like, dude, Jacoby Myers was good last year even, and like no one gave a shit. So it's just kind of funny. Like, there is obviously I maybe we should like transition into talking about him real quick before we go. I mean, what do you think? Jacoby Myers.
Yeah, I don't know. He's a tough one. Like, would you send a second round pick for him and be happy?
Yep. As a contender, depth piece, kind of a thing. Like, I would send a second. Like, I think he's worth that. I think he was worth that when he was on the Patriots. You know, like, he was the main guy over there. Obviously, he's the number 2 here, but the guy's playing well. Like, I think he's one of those guys. Like, I think a second round pick, a random second. You know, I when I say random, I just mean like, you know, pick number 6 or 7 in a 12 team, I guess. Like,
would you sell him for that?
What those are. I would, if I was a contending team, or sorry, if I was not a contending team, I would take a second for him. I think him and Cortland Sutton live in the exact same spot.
Yeah, I mean, he's still young. Like, he's only 26. Be 27 in a month or so. Like, yeah, I probably would too if I was rebuilding, get that second round pick. That's fair. Like, I think he's going to be pretty productive this year. What were you going to say?
Let's see. I just wanted to look up where he is. I think it's kind of so he's right around Gabe Davis, Tyler Lockett, Michael Wilson. Damn, Treylon Burks. Yeah, I guess that's fair that he fell that far, but it's like, I mean, if you could trade Jacoby Myers and get Treylon Burks as a non-contending team, I would do that easy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if you can get one of these rookies and younger players or last year's rookies, second-year players that, like you said, that haven't produced so hot, like Treylon Burks, and isn't there someone else who's Jamison Williams or something? Like, if you can get Jamison Williams for him,
I would do that in a heartbeat.
And I might even be okay with it if I was a contending team, like just banking on those guys, not like the history of receivers who don't really do much their first 2 years, for them to go on to do anything that, after that is not very good. Like,
right.
So, but no one else really, like Jimmy Garoppolo, Michael Mayer, like hasn't really changed that much. Like, Garoppolo, if you need a third quarterback in a super flex league, I'm fine with trading, a late second, third round pick for him or something.
I
would solidify your team.
Yeah, I would easily send a second, and it's always funny because like I kind of view like the third and the fourth round picks as almost like throw-ins, and like not that they don't have any value, but like it's kind of like if that's what it takes to make the deal happen. Like, it's like, oh, I'll give you a second for Jimmy Garoppolo, and they're like, give me a second and a third. It's like, okay, that's essentially the same deal to me in my head. Honestly, it's kind of like where I'm coming from right now.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, we'll finish up the AFC West, and we'll be back with the NFC West in the next video. A lot of interesting, specifically on the Rams, a lot of interesting players there. So
yeah.
As always, like and subscribe, and we will be back. Catch you guys